The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Oh, hello. Didn't notice you there. Welcome to the Parental Compass. I am your host, Bobby Williams. I am once again asking you to please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. We're also on Apple and Spotify, so be sure to look us up. We're out here. I think we can all agree reading is a fundamental skill that we want all children to learn. But sometimes it can be a real struggle, especially if you're dealing with a young person who might have learning disabilities. Our guest today is a true advocate for the written word, Jennifer Williamson-Forster, the executive director of the South Sound Reading Foundation. I have seen few people in my life as truly passionate about their jobs as Jennifer is. So we got into all types of ideas about how you can make reading a bigger part of your family culture and how you can just help readers of all different skill levels. So we're going to get into it in just a second, but first here's a quick word from our sponsor, AmeriGroup. We're all filling a lot of different roles in life. Parent, coworker, friend. Well, AmeriGroup offers whole care for the whole you. It's all covered. Doctor visits, prescriptions, extra vision benefits, and even help getting your GED. Visit chooseamerigroup.com/WA.
We've got The First Day of Winter by Denise Fleming and Nothing in Common by one of our locals, Karina Lukin. And then LeBron James's I Promise is in there too. So
that's awesome.
All new, all really excited to be sharing those in the month of January. So yeah.
So Jennifer, tell me a little bit about you and kind of your role in the community of helping young readers.
Okay, well, I'm the executive director of the South Sound Reading Foundation, and our job, our role, our mission is to engage all of our South Sound children and youth in the wonder and promise of books and reading. And I see that as a particularly important calling. Having been a struggling reader myself, I understand the value of reading and why it's so important. So
why is it important, like in regards to education and other things? Like we all obviously know reading is good, but what role does it play into everything else a kid is learning?
Well, reading is, when you look at school and school readiness, reading is the key skill to have. 85% of school content, it just rolls off my head, out of my head, is delivered through the written word. And so we want to make sure all of our kids, from wherever they come from, have the capacity to read at or above grade level, so that when they are in school, they are reading. But we want to go above and beyond that a little bit too, Bobby, because we know that beyond school readiness and high performing kids in school, we want all of our kids, all of our region's kids, to be eager and engaged readers and kind of lifelong readers, because there is nothing more valuable, especially in times like this, than to be able to dive into a book and just go someplace else and be someplace else and experience something else. I think that's really valuable. So.
Yeah. Well, you're talking a little bit about having a learning disability, and I had, a learning disability too growing up. And initially, like spelling test and reading, it was such a pain. Like I hated being called to read out loud in class. And so I really did not like reading. And so what advice or like words of wisdom would you give to parents who maybe have a student like that, where it just feels like a real chore for them?
Well, that's a great question. And that one that I did experience too, growing up, that sense of stress and pressure when called upon to read. I think there are so many tips I'd like to share with parents who, based on experience and based on having done this job for 14 years now. One of them is, when you're reading with your kiddo, and you hope you're encouraging them to read if they're old enough to do so. You're giving them a really relaxed and comfortable place to be and to take the stress out of reading. That is key. One of the other things I like to share with parents, motivational reading is like key for kids. And I don't know about you, Bobby, but when I was a kid and I was struggling with reading and I hated it and I didn't know what to do, I discovered a book on horses. And let me tell you, I was that total horse geek girl. I loved horses, horses, horses. And I think my mom probably figured that out. So I got a book on horses, and by gosh, I did my best to read that book cover to cover, just because I was so obsessed with horses. And I've talked to, I don't know how many parents over the years who have had this same struggle, but they're like, oh yeah, my kid likes butterflies or fairies or motorcycles, whatever. If you can find something that can pique their curiosity and makes them excited about reading and learning, that's where to go. And then the other thing is definitely work with your teachers, or your kids' teachers or their reading specialists, to help get more tips and tricks to help them engage in reading and develop a love for reading. And then finally, as a parent, kind of looking into, where are their, what is their reading level? Most books, you can either look it up online or even on the back of a book, it'll tell you what reading level it is.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that you're giving them something, your kiddos, something that they're not going to be struggling with every other word. That's really frustrating. So those are my tips. Yeah. So yeah.
Were there other things that helped you when you were young, other than just finding the right books?
Well, I did have, my parents did have me assessed, and that's important. And so then I also had um, we were a reading specialist who helped me work through my dyslexia,
Yeah.
and not necessarily work through it, but develop the skills I needed to be able to read effectively. And
Kind
now,
of work around it. Yeah.
yeah. And now I can't stop, right? I
Mhm.
mean, even though I'm a slow reader, and I'll readily admit that, I love to read. And it's really brought a wonderful, rich career in my path because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, very grateful.
I remember being diagnosed when I was young, and it wasn't exactly dyslexia, but something similar. And they described it as sort of like letters moving around. And I was like, I don't know if that's true to me exactly, but how would you even define dyslexia? That's something I'm curious about.
Well, for me, it really is reversal of letters, and I still do it.
Mhm.
P's and B's and D's, even sometimes G's, M's and N's. I kind of sometimes have to do a double take when I read a word to make sure I've got it. And a spelling, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for spell check. Although you do have to check spell check just to make sure you're spelling the word correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, so what took you from this person who reading is just this painful struggle to now you're like a major reading advocate?
Yeah.
How'd you get there, do you think?
Well, I think in part, well, this is not going to be a chronological. I think in part, I'm so passionate about reading because I experienced the before and the after of reading, and I know so many people, my kids and my family included, who don't remember learning to read. They simply, walked into kindergarten and picked up the skills, and by first grade we're reading, and by second grade we're reading well, and it was never a struggle. But for me, I remember the before and the after of what my life was like and the trajectory of my life was like in third grade, because that's the cutoff. Kids are supposedly learning to read birth to 8 or third grade, and then after that they're reading to learn. And I was just hitting my head against a wall. I mean, I couldn't quite figure out what wasn't working and why it wasn't working. And once I was diagnosed and I had the interventions, and I also had a wonderful opportunity to have access to books, whether it was the library or the bookstore next door to my mom's shop. I was able to get books that were interesting, that were of my reading level, and that's the difference that made. So I understand the value and the impact that reading can have or cannot have on a life. So that's why I'm really passionate, and that's the pathway. I mean, literally, I went from a non-reader in third grade, standing in front of a class trying to give read out loud and give a book report on something I couldn't comprehend, to not getting a book out of my nose a year and a half later. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting time right now.
Yeah.
COVID's going on, and we have great teachers who are doing the virtual learning, but
Mhm.
parents are sometimes like filling that role of teacher a little
Yep.
bit,
Yep.
or at least they're there to give some extra help. Do you have like practices or ideas for parents that can help their kids to be better readers, whatever level they're at?
Absolutely. And one of the things, I was talking to a retired pediatrician this morning who's a volunteer here, and I was asking her, what are her tips and concerns, for parents, that I might be able to share today. And one of her real concerns, especially in this time, is the amount of time kids are spending on screens.
Mhm.
So if we can do anything to mitigate that, because they're going to need to be on screens for school, but when they're not, when it's not necessary, really to do interventions to make sure your kids have definite set times that are not screen times. So some of the tips we have are, and I remember doing this when my kids were little, when we were making dinner. If one of the kids wasn't helping with dinner, they were reading aloud, whether it was, something from school or a book or a poem or a short story or something they wrote. We used that dinner time creating that fun sharing. Sometimes it was helping read a recipe. So definitely building reading into just about every activity. And then building a reading routine. Most families have that. Some families don't. Some families come to it and it comes and goes. But after dinner, reading is a great time to spend some time reading. Anyway, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Oh, just like it sounds like you're sort of saying it can almost be like a bonding thing for
Oh,
families.
yeah. Well, that's one of the three things we talk about when we talk about why reading is so important. Number one, healthy brain development. Number two, school readiness. And number three, family bonding. And it really is. It's fun. It is an amazing, it creates a great family culture when you are collectively reading a book, and then you even 10 years later, I turn around and reference that with my kids. Do you remember this from this story? And they're like, oh yeah, yeah. So
Mhm.
it's definitely made us closer together. All the stories we read, and it wasn't, we'd be out for a family drive, and if I wasn't driving, maybe I was reading a book, and if I wasn't reading a book, we were playing a game, the ABC game. So you can build reading into almost any activity, and make it fun, and that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that kids have associate reading with
Yeah.
fun and exploration. So
On that idea of kind of making it fun, are all books created equal? Because I think about comic books, I'm a big comic fan, but it's obviously like different than a regular book. But would you say it's a lesser form of learning, or what do you think about all that?
no, I think if a kid is excited about a comic book, then the more comic books you can get to that kid, the better, and maybe even encouraging them to make one.
Mhm.
Yeah, as an activity at home. I mean, that's kind of a fun thing to do. But no, I absolutely, graphic novels, comic books, the more the merrier. If it's going to get a kid excited about reading, make it happen.
Yeah. What about audiobooks? Like, is that an appropriate substitute? Because then they're receiving information, but they're not really learning to read. Like, how do you feel about audiobooks for struggling learners?
If you can match up an audiobook with a book, I think that's really enriching. I know that with my kids, audiobooks, whenever we were driving around, if, it felt like, if I wanted to hear an audiobook, I loved Kate DeCamilla. So we would listen to Kate DeCamilla's, any of her books are phenomenal. So many great audiobooks. So I am a fan of the audiobook. I wouldn't say it's you would want to replace it with that lap time of actually sitting down and looking at books and exploring, because then kids get a sense of what those words look like and how they relate to the story. But they, when your kids are getting older, if they are learning to read and they have a book and maybe they're a struggling reader, but they want to read the book, an audiobook can be a great accompaniment to that. So they have the book and they're reading through it, but they're also getting that enrichment of listening to the book as well.
Hmm. Do you think libraries still play much of a role today? Because it seems like, it's a different world in a lot of ways. Is there still place for them?
Libraries? Oh, don't get me started. Yes, they are. I know they're the key in so many ways. One of the things that I tell parents even now when they ask is, if what happens, how do I know what my kid's interested in, or how can I find the right book for my kid? You can ask the librarian. You can go on Timberland Regional Library right now and type in, hey, I've got a 7-year-old kid who likes blah, blah, blah. Can you recommend some titles for us? And they'll give those back to you. And I think one of the great things about libraries is if you have reluctant readers, or if you have voracious readers, you can go online and you can order books, and then you can swing by, and even in this pandemic world, you can pick up those books safely and then take them home and share them. And that's a great resource for parents, especially if they can't afford to be buying lots of books. So yeah, definitely libraries there. And there's so many other resources that libraries have to share. It's not just the books. There's online classes and all sorts of great school tools for
Yeah.
families. Yeah.
It seems like a lot of libraries are even getting rid of fines, at least locally. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. There are, a lot of parents who are, their situations change, and the libraries are becoming a priority, and to be able to access it and use it is important. So taking care of or getting rid of those fines is a great way to encourage families to have access, all
Yeah.
families. Yeah.
They sent my fines to collections a few years ago.
Oh dear.
I was dealing with that for a bit. But why do you think, I guess, reading is especially important now more than ever with COVID?
Um, that well, so
Or do you?
oh, I do. I feel that reading is important to collectively as a family, with parents reading, or a caring adult reading with kids, is particularly important right now, because it gives a sense of calm and in complete and total engagement, not just for the kids, but for the parents or the caregivers. I mean, there's nothing more enriching than having that focused time to read and enjoy something collectively as a group, or a family. But for kiddos, it is such a great reading is such a great instrument, a book and reading to to escape, and to really, and to feel, and to empathize, and to, you're building all those skills, but you're also, you get to get out of your life as it is right now, which isn't maybe great for some, and to have that escape, and to build those worlds, and understand, the universe in a different way, but in a very safe way, is, I think, really important in this day and age,
Yeah,
and what we're going through.
I think that's a good point, in that it's opening you up to different ways of thinking or different ideas you wouldn't
Yeah.
consider. And
Yeah.
that's sort of what education is like at its core.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's why I like reading. I'm sorry to make it, but that's one of the reasons why we want to, we want every kid to be an eager and engaged readers, that you want everybody to be lifelong learners, and reading is really the gateway to that. If you're interested in learning and exploring and experiencing, reading and books are a great way to do it.
hmm. Do you have any closing thoughts or ideas we haven't covered that you want to share with the audience?
Well, again, as kiddos, even little kiddos, babies in utero, benefit from reading and hearing families talking and sharing. And in this stressful time, I think that there's no greater way to bring your family together than around a story, and to give your kids a sense of comfort and routine. in a great story and great books, and there's so many out there. So
Well, thank you so
yeah.
much, Jennifer.
Well, thank you, Bobby. Thanks for thinking of me, and happy reading.
Good times. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I actually have a book recommendation for you. It's called Harry Potter. It's about a wizard. So that's our show today. Thank you, Family Education and Support Services. Thank you, AmeriGroup. And we'll see you next week on the Parental Compass. Peace.